In the last 2.5 years or so in WIAS, I've been focusing on two major research projects. The first one is what I call internal attention, or directing attention to predominantly visual working memory right now. And that's comprised of two main projects. The first one is looking at object-based attention in visual working memory, and the other one's looking at whether higher level features work. And I'll talk about more of these later on. While I was doing that project, I realized that, I had a problem trying to make up the third project, being that the way that we measure visual working memory is actually extremely bad. So before I could actually do any more research, I'd have to fix that problem first. So that started my second research project here. I call this visual working memory tracking, and it's just a new method of measuring visual working memory. Before I go into each one, I'd like to say that both of these were both projects were funded by JSPS Kakenhi, the first one through a research activity startup, and the second one through a early career scientist, Kakenhi. Okay, but before I get into the results themselves, just a brief background on what I've been doing. So the predominant thing I've been studying for the first project is attention. Attention is we all know what it is. It's an ability that we have to focus on some things and to ignore things that don't really matter to us at the time. Strangely, attention seems to fall under certain rules. For example, if you look at the picture on the right, this line here stands out. The vertical line here stands out, but there's 4 other vertical lines on the right, on bottom right, which don't stand out. But if you focus, you can pick them up. And this can be explained by some basic rules of attention, being that anything that's very different from its neighbors will stand out. But you can overwrite this by focusing your attention. Another key rule of attention is that there are only certain things you can focus attention on efficiently. And it's pretty much limited to things like color, shape, orientation, motion, size. If you try to focus on, for example, what this means is that if you're trying to find, for example, a black cat, and you try to look for cat-like objects, you're going to fail. If you try to look for black objects, that'll work. So the key question is, why is it so limited? In psychology, we tend to try to think about things, some people like to think about things in terms of evolution. It doesn't really make any sense in terms of evolutionary-wise to be bad at searching for things like cats or other predators. We should be good at searching for things that would help us survive. Instead, we're left with things that we can the things we can focus on are just a generic set of features. So the key question I've been trying to look at is this limit of attention just the way caused by the way attention works? Or is it because that in every other study that we've tried to use to study attention, it's been paying attention to things we are looking at the moment? So one way of getting at this question is to study how attention works when you direct it not towards what you're looking at right now or current perception, but to focus it on something you saw in the past or something that you've imagined up. In other words, you're using your visual working memory. So before joining WIAS, I had some previous research looking at this. I don't have time to go into too much depth, but in summary, what I found was the way in which we use attention doesn't really differ. There's not much change between attention between perception and attention attending towards visual working memory. All the rules or the hallmarks of attention are still the same. So the basic hallmarks are the more you have to pay attention to, the slower you are doing it. You can only focus on features. Those kind of rules are still the same. However, something is different. What we found was that other people have found when you're paying attention to things you're looking at, there are three main forms. You can pay attention to an area, you can pay attention to a feature, or you can pay attention to an object. And that is also the hierarchy. So if you pay attention to something in space, so you pay attention to an area, that attentional system is extremely fast. If you try to pay attention to an object, that's actually a very slow system. When we tried the same experiments for attention towards visual working memory, the hierarchy was completely reversed. Object-based attention was faster than feature, and feature-based attention was faster than spatial. What that means, I'm not sure yet. We're not really sure yet. But an easy explanation is that visual working memory is object-based. So when you store something in memory, you don't store it based on its features or its location, you store it as a whole object. So my first project at WIAS was to basically study this. Is the hierarchy completely reversed, or is it just because we're working with something different? Which leads to my first project. A very basic experiment here. 4 different experiments with the only thing differing between the experiments are the stimulus used. So the task was simply to remember one of these displays depending on the experiment. So experiment 1, I used colored shapes. Experiment 2 was colored lines of different orientations. Colored 3 was oriented shapes, and experiment 4 was colored oriented shapes. After remembering the stimulus, there was a mask to make sure they were using working memory. A short attention interval, and then we give them a target. In this case, for example, in experiment 1, we could ask them red square, and then the participant just simply had to say the red square was on the left or right of fixation. And then they gave feedback, and they did this multiple times. The results were unexpected. We had a set size manipulation as well, 3 to 5. By the basic rules of attention, the more things you have to search through, the slower you should be. And that's basically what we found. When you're searching for color, there is a short difference. There's a small difference between 3 and 5, not really that big, which again is normal because you're searching for a feature. Searching for shape, surprisingly, there was a much bigger increase between 3 and 5. What it tells us is that when you're trying to search your memory for a color, you're extremely fast. If you try to search for a shape, it's not too bad, but it is slower. The interesting part was the conjunction, the purple line. There is a purple line here. It's just completely hidden by the red line. Under the rules of attention, searching for 2 features combined should be extremely slow. Instead, what we found is searching for a conjunction, a colored shape, is as fast as searching for a shape. Now, this was weird, so I removed shape and used orientation instead, and found something even weirder, experiment 2. Color is still the same. It increases slightly, but not very much. But this time, searching for the conjunction was actually faster than searching for the orientation. And that just made no sense at all. So maybe it's something to do with color, because color is such a fast feature. Perhaps that's what's causing the issue here. So experiment 3, I removed color and used shape and orientation. And this time shape took the role of color, being the faster one, and the conjunction is still the same as orientation this time. So at this point, I had no idea what's going on. The only way to explain this is that people are searching, when they attend to things in memory, they are basing their attention on a single feature. So in experiment 1, they were basing it on color. Experiment 2, they were basing it on color as well. Experiment 3, they're basing it on shape, even though shape was also a feature in the first experiment. However, they can only seem to search for a single feature. After that, they are forced to use that single feature to summon the second feature. So it becomes an object-based search after the first feature. And just to confirm that, I put in color as the fourth in experiment 4. So that now there's 3 features, but color is completely irrelevant. And basically we replicated experiment 3, which means that there is a primary feature that is chosen when they memorize the stimulus, and they are working through that primary feature. After that, to access any other feature, they have to use an object. So from this experiment, we concluded that when directing attention in visual working memory, people were searched using a primary feature, but after that, it is object-based. So if they are still using features, but objects are closer to the surface than in perception, at least, then theoretically speaking, it should be possible then to use higher level features, because in higher level features, searching for higher level features, for example, things that look like a cat is a high level feature. That's impossible in perception because it's all feature-based. It's predominantly feature-based. Now that object-based representations are closer to the surface in visual working memory, it should be possible to direct attention to a wider range of features instead of just the normal 5 that I mentioned before. So to test this, basically the same experiment for the memory task. You remember a display, there's a mask. We ask you to either search for a color or to search for an object. And then they say, was it on the left or the right? And then we can match this with the visual search task using the exact same stimulus, but this time they get the target before they see the stimulus, and they can just say left or right once they see the display. So we know that they can search for a feature. So under the normal rules of attention from perception, they should be very fast at finding the color. In this task, they might be slower here, we're not sure. But when you ask them to find, for example, the squirrel in the visual search task, they should be slow. In the memory task, if they can use animacy or objects as a search criteria, then they should be a lot faster in the memory task than in the visual search task. The results weren't quite as expected, but it was in the right direction. Look at the visual search task first. As expected, finding the object based on its color is much faster than finding it based on its object. In the memory case, there's no difference. What this means is they are basically as good as searching for a squirrel or a teapot as they are searching for red or blue. So what this means is that there is a wider range of features that they can use for searching in visual working memory. There is no reversal in the pattern though. So it does not mean that this is not due to, it's not completely due to the fact that object representations are present in visual working memory, but not present in perception. There's something else going on here. So the theory that the working theory I came into this research with, it sort of holds, but there is more to it than that. And that's what I've been working on. Well, I've got to keep doing more experiments to work on that. As I said, while doing these experiments, I came up against the wall being that measuring visual working memory, getting the accuracy of visual working memory is extremely difficult just because the ways we measure it are so bad. So that started a new project. Visual working memory methods, we've been using the same methods the last 20 years or so, 20, 30 years or so, and they are at their limits. The way we measure visual working memory seems to be usually something like this. You see some colors, you're asked to reproduce the colors, or you're shown a display and asked, was that the same display you saw before? These experiments started off okay. You can do the experiment in 600 trials, which is about an hour's worth of experiments, but the subjects hate it. But as our experimental questions got more and more difficult, the number of trials has increased massively. For example, this experiment here, this paper here, that is 800 trials per session with 3 sessions. That's over 2,000 trials. It became a 3-day session, took 3 days, 2 hours each day. That's about the limit. we've come up against the limit of what we can actually do for visual working memory. So we do need a new method. So I've spent the last year or so just fiddling around with ways of trying to invent a new way of measuring visual working memory, so that I can continue my own research as well. What I came up with was something like this. The participants look at a moving trail of dots like this. They have to remember that trail of where those trail of dots went, and then afterwards they have to reproduce the motion of one of the trails of dots. So in that one, they were queued for the green one, so they had to reproduce the green one. If Zoom makes the video impossible to see, you can scan the QR code there to see. Afterwards, we can then match what they reproduced with what where the stimulus actually went. So the blue dots here represent the actual, the orange line represents where the stimulus actually went. Each blue dot here represents a sample of their reproduction. So you can already see here that we've collected a couple of hundred data points in a single trial. You can then match the two using some algorithm that I don't have time to explain now. But you can see this is a good trial. So it has a low RMSE score, which is good. You can see that they basically drew it where it went. Here's an example of a very bad trial where they completely forgot, and the stimulus went one way and their reproduction went another. And that because of that, the algorithm gives them a very bad score. This is 10 times worse. Through this matching, because we gather so much data in a single trial, and then because the matching algorithm works pretty well, this new method is actually extremely efficient. I managed to get similar results. Instead of taking a whole hour to do experiments, you can do this instead of doing 800 trials and taking about an hour, you can do this now in 5-10 minutes using 10 trials. Before you needed about 30 subjects, now we can do it in 10 subjects. And one of the biggest advantages of this new method is you can see here that if the subjects remember what they saw, then their answers usually fall in this either the blue or around the blue or the red distribution. If they have no idea what they saw and they just guess, you see the gray distribution here. That's usually where their answer falls along. So the remembered trials and the forgotten trials basically don't overlap, which makes, if you want to do any mathematical modeling using this method, it's so much easier than it was before. Another huge advantage now is that this new method, as a byproduct of just using a moving stimulus, we can now also measure their average error across time. For example, in this experiment here, where there was only one stimulus and the stimulus went from left to right of the screen, you can see we had 2 retention periods. So between when they saw the stimulus and when they had to report the stimulus, there was either a 1-second interval or a 10-second interval. You can see with 1 second, they are a lot better, but they are a lot better mostly in the beginning of the trial. When you increase the set size to 3, like in the example I showed you, the big difference happens at the end of the trial between 1 and 10 seconds. So you can now, this method allows us to look at things like this now. How visual working memory changes across time. Moving in terms of concrete outputs, each of these 3 projects I introduced, I presented, or a colleague has presented at international conferences. So the first one was presented at VSS in Florida last year. The high-level features one was presented at OPAM in Boston last year, and the visual working memory measurement project was presented at VSS this year. All 3 are now in manuscript form in different stages of production, mostly waiting for peer reviews, although the first one did come back recently and I've been doing revisions on that. One other thing is that the new measurement in visual working memory, I am in talks with the Waseda University Patent Office, the Intellectual Property Office, about submitting a patent for this measurement. It turns out Japanese bureaucracy is very slow, so who knows how that will go, but I might have a patent submitted based on this research as well. And that's it.